What if the very thing that you're doing to protect yourself is actually the thing that is keeping you from feeling deeply connected with other people? So many of us believe that if we can just be easy enough, if we're kind enough, if we're agreeable, we are super understanding, we're pretty enough, we're successful enough, we're spiritual, we're emotionally regulated, then we won't be judged, we won't be criticized, rejected, or abandoned. So what do? We perform, we edit ourselves, we have a filter. We hold back what we really think, what we really feel, what we believe. We swallow what we feel. And we say to others, I'm fine, when we're really not fine. And how often have you avoided having a hard conversation because you were afraid of how you might be received? So we convince ourselves that it's better to not say anything at all because we don't want to mess up things with another person. But here is the painful truth. When we hide the real parts of ourselves in order to stay connected to another person, we often lose the connection that we're longing for because people cannot truly connect with the version of us that is being performative. They can only connect with the version of us that we are willing to reveal.
Hey, and welcome to Masks Off Inner Freedom for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. This is a podcast for those who are tired of holding it all together. I'm Kim Gross, your host, and if you've ever felt like you're doing all the right things, but still feel anxious, disconnected, or quietly burned out, you're in the right place. Here we talk about the patterns you don't even realize you're living inside of: self-abandonment, over-functioning, chasing approval, and mistaking productivity for your worth, and more. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about remembering who you were before you learned to perform, perfect, and please to belong. Each week, we'll slow things down. We'll unpack the nervous system, the inner critic, and the subtle ways that you learned to disconnect from your true self so you can stop living from pressure and start living from presence. This is your space to take the masks off, so let's begin.
This episode is for anyone who is listening and is ready to stop performing and start living from a place of inner freedom. So this month, the month of June, I have been talking about the inner controller. I've been describing what the inner controller does, what she looks like, and how the inner controller can keep us stuck in a mental prison rather than having freedom, or AKA paradise. And today, what I want to talk about is one of the most painful prisons, in my opinion, is the prison of perfectionism within the container of relationships. Why do I say this? Because perfectionism does not just show up in work, in your appearance of looking a certain way, having the perfect body, or your achievements, or maybe having your home be the perfect home and everything is picked up perfectly, everything looks amazing. Or it's not about perfectionism in having perfect goals. Perfectionism can also show up in how we love, how we communicate. Perfectionism shows up in what we're afraid to say to our loved ones, and it can show up in how we hide ourselves. It shows up in the moments when we choose to have approval over being authentic. And it often shows up in the relationships that matter the most to us. So I can say with certainty that I absolutely have done this throughout my life and can sometimes continue to show up in this way. I know that if I'm being 1,000% honest with myself, that there is still this part of me that deeply desires to, and I'm going to say it, I hate to say it, but it is true. There's a small part of me that deeply desires to have not only my kids, but mostly my kids, but other people as well, friends, other people that know me and have known me, to see me in a certain way, that I want to be seen or viewed or received as being honestly perfect, a perfect mom, the perfect friend, perfect sister, aunt, wife, and so on. And that's my inner controller driving the bus on that, because I don't want other people to think and feel that I'm too much, that I'm too much of a pain in the butt. I don't want people to perceive me as being needy or selfish. Like, that is a big driver for me, is that I don't want to come off as being selfish. And so what do I do in order to avoid being viewed as being selfish? I say yes to everyone and everything because I don't want to disappoint them. I don't want anyone to be mad at me. I don't want to say the wrong thing. If I say something that might hit for a loved one and it might trigger them, then they're going to be upset with me. And then we're going to have this thing between us, this discourse. And for a people pleaser and a perfectionist, it is so extremely uncomfortable to have another person, especially someone that you love and care about and that you're close with, to have another person be upset with you. I will even say that at times I would feel really bad when a driver would be upset with me, someone I don't even know, complete stranger. And if I cut them off or they got really mad because I was driving slow or whatever, I would feel so bad about it. Right. And you just, going back to the relationships with the people that we love and care about so deeply, we don't want things to be awkward. We're so afraid that if we speak the truth and we say what we think, we say what we feel and what we believe, that it's going to ruin the relationship. And I can honestly say that I have been there with my young adult children. And if I'm not being mindful, I can still go there. I can still go to this place of not wanting to make things awkward or ruin the relationship. And so I'm monitoring what I think and what I feel, or I'm scanning and I'm thinking, should I say this? Should I say that? Should I say this? Should I say that? Will that make this one upset? Will that make that one be mad at me? Now, I don't do this as often. I'm way more authentic, way more real and genuine these days because I have done so much healing work on myself that it is more important for me to be my true self than it is to keep things going in the relationship. I don't worry as much about rejection and abandonment as I used to. But if I'm being honest, my inner controller can still show up because underneath the surface, it many times is fear. There is fear of rejection. There's fear of being criticized. There's fear of not being understood. There is a fear of being judged and criticized, and fear of someone seeing the real us. And then if they decide that we are too much or not enough or too difficult, too dramatic, too selfish or wrong, bad in some way, if they sense that or feel that way, or we sense or we think that's how the person feels. And oftentimes the truth of the matter is that's not the case. If the people in our lives, our spouses, our friends, our siblings, our children love us, truly do, they're not really thinking this. Now, I'm not going to say that's true 100% of the time because we do have unhealthy people in our lives. We do have dysfunctional, unhealthy relationships. And I invite you to seriously look at and examine the relationships in your life. And if you feel like you have this fear of being your true self, and they truly do criticize you, judge you, reject you, abandon you, then it's not so much to point the finger at them and blame them for the way the relationship is. The invitation is to go inward and see what's going on in you. Are you trying to be perfect? Are you trying to do any of the things that I just suggested? And you're not being your true self. You're wearing the mask of people pleasing and perfectionism because you're afraid. If that's the case, which most often it is with the people that are unhealthy for us, we're showing up in that way. That's our co-creation. That's the part that we have to take ownership of, because most likely you did this dance with this person for a long time. You came to the relationship feeling insecure. You came to the relationship feeling that you're unworthy, feeling that you're not enough. So what your inner controller started to do was to perform, to perfect, to please, so that you could keep these people in your life and you quote unquote felt safe or secure. But it's a false sense. It's a false sense of security because you're not truly secure with people who you are so afraid that they're going to reject you, criticize you, or judge you, that you most likely either don't want to be in relationship with anymore, or limited amount of time with those people, or you change the dance. You change the dance. You heal from within. You start to believe from within that you are worthy, you are good, you are enough just as you are, and your inner controller can start to relax, can start to rest, because she won't need to do all of those things. And so rather than being honest with others, we start to become careful. Instead of being vulnerable with others, we start to come off as being polished. Instead of being real about who we are, we just try to become acceptable. And then this is why and how the perfectionism becomes a prison. And now you don't have the real connection that you desire. You end up feeling lonely and disconnected. And then you start to feel miserable. And you might start then numbing because now you don't know how to deal with the discomfort of feeling separate, disconnected, lonely. And ultimately, it's a disconnection from yourself as well. And that doesn't feel good either. That discomfort of being disconnected from your true self. You're in this prison. You're not allowing your true self to be revealed because your inner controller is telling you, don't say that. Don't feel that. Don't be needy. Don't need too much. Whatever you do, don't make that person uncomfortable. Don't let them see that you're upset with them. Don't create any conflict. Keep it together. Be agreeable. Be the easy one. Be strong for everybody. Be the one who is understanding and has so much empathy and compassion. And honestly, it's like your inner controller believes that she's helping you. She believes it's protecting you from being disconnected from another. She believes that she's keeping you safe because that is the role of the inner controller, to keep you safe. But at the end of the day, the inner controller doesn't understand that connection is built on self-abandonment, not on true connection. So she might be trying to keep the peace on the outside, but it's creating so much loneliness on the inside, so much loneliness. And this is something that we don't talk about. We avoid it because it is uncomfortable and it is painful. But the loneliness that is associated or comes along with being perfect or trying to be perfect, because none of us are perfect. Let's just be real about that. No matter how much we try, we're not going to be able to be perfect. But even in the trying to be perfect, there's a loneliness that comes along. Why is there this loneliness? This part of us being perceived as being perfect can be deeply lonely. I just want to really say that first. Deeply lonely. Because being the one who never says what she needs is lonely. Being the one who doesn't want to be a burden is lonely. And then you end up being this type of person who can do everything, does do everything. You're the one who's always there for others. You're the one who's showing up for others. You're strong. You have it together. You're competent. And you are hiding when you're feeling vulnerable, when you're feeling like a hot mess, because the perfectionist in you doesn't want to show up as being vulnerable or messy. Again, because the inner controller says if you show up as being too needy, too vulnerable, too messy, too imperfect, then other people aren't going to stay with you. But I'm telling you, being the one who has it together all the time can be lonely. Being the one who never speaks up for her needs is lonely. Being the one who is always understanding, always accommodating, always agreeable can be lonely, because eventually nobody really knows what's happening inside of you. If you are just keeping everything in and you're being stoic and you're holding it all together, people don't know what's going on with you. Like, people very rarely ever know when I'm struggling, or at least in the past. And I'll say, if I'm being honest, even to this day, people don't always know what's happening inside of me. The people in my life may love me, they might admire me, they definitely depend on me, but do they actually know me? Do they actually know you? And that can be a very painful place to live. Why would that be a painful place? Because what we deeply want is not to just be liked. It might seem like that's what we want, but what we deeply want, what we deeply, deeply want, is to be known, to be seen, to be understood. We want to be loved as we are, not just some version of ourselves that never disappoints anyone. And more than likely, this started in childhood. We learned early on that it was not safe or okay, and we were not loved or seen for who we truly were. We learned we had to be a good girl or a good boy, and we had to live up to the expectations of others. And I know that even today, I can still sometimes hold back with my kids, especially my young adult kids. I can hold back what I am really feeling because I don't want to create conflict. I don't want to take the chance that if I'm not being super understanding or agreeable or on their side about a particular situation, that it's going to create some type of discord between us, that we won't be as close. Or I don't want to disappoint them. I don't want to be seen differently. I just want to be seen as the good mom. And so, why is that a problem? It's a problem because, again, they are not seeing like the real version of me when I do that. When I put on a mask, I am withholding. I'm withholding some type of truth, some type of feeling. And even if the feeling that I'm having is way off, and I'm missing the mark, and maybe the feeling that I'm having is coming from a fear, it's okay. Because then I'm teaching them that it's okay to share and speak up, even if you're not right or wrong. And there really is no right or wrong when it comes to what we think and feel. It just is our experience in that moment. But we can tend to go to this place of not being vulnerable, because vulnerability is risky. Why is vulnerability risky? Because at the end of the day, we cannot control the outcome. We cannot control people, places, and things. We don't know that if how a person's going to respond if we speak our truth, if they're going to respond in a positive way. Or if we express that we need something, we cannot control if the other person will be understanding, if they'll be able to meet the need. And oftentimes it might feel like if a person doesn't meet our needs, that then somehow they don't love us, which is not true, but we feel it. Or sometimes we're afraid that when we set a boundary, somebody might not like it. And chances are they're not. They're not going to like it. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still be vulnerable and set the boundary. You might end up losing a relationship over it. And that's what we fear. We can't control how the other person's going to be if they're going to walk away from us. But at the end of the day, it's most important that we stay true and connected to ourselves if we want to have that inner peace, if we want to have freedom, if we want paradise, and not worry when we share our feelings or thoughts or beliefs whether or not the other person will validate us. When we're looking for validation from another, when we say something, which we all do all the time, we'll say something that might be a little bit risky and we're looking, scanning. Did they receive that well? Are they upset with me? And when we do that, that keeps us in prison because now the way that we feel on the inside is dependent on how the other person receives us. And that's why perfectionism hates vulnerability, because not only perfectionism or our perfectionistic self, but our inner controller wants a freaking guarantee. She wants to know, if I do X, Y, and Z, will they still love me? Will they still approve of me? Will they still stay? If I'm honest, if I'm real, and I say how I really see the situation, especially if what you want to say to the other person is something about how they're being, how they're showing up. Like if you want to speak up to your husband and say something about how he's been acting or your child's been acting, that feels even more risky because now it is setting a boundary, or you are holding them accountable, or you are saying something that could definitely be interpreted as a judgment or a criticism. And so then you worry, will they still stay? Will they think less of me? Will they still be as close to me? Will they change how they see me? Our inner controller wants guarantee of all of this. And there is no guarantee when it comes to this stuff. There's no guarantee. So vulnerability asks us to be honest without knowing the outcome. And that can be terrifying to your nervous system. It is terrifying to think about, if I say this, that, or the other thing to my adult child, will he or will she still be as close to me? And there's no guarantee. There's no way of knowing for sure because we can't control other people once again. So what is the difference between being performative and staying connected? When we're in this performative place or perfectionistic place, it can sound like this: let me be or become who I think I need to be so that I will still have your approval, so that you'll still approve of me. Let me just say what I need to say so that you will still approve of me, even if it's not the truth. But connection says, let me show you who I really am. Let me say what is truly on my heart and mind, and trust that our relationship can hold the truth. Performing might say, I'm going to hide the messy parts. I'm going to hide the parts of me that are vulnerable, the parts of me that are messy, the parts of me that I don't love as much, so that you don't leave. Connection says, I'm willing to be my whole imperfect human self with you. Performing says, I need to manage how you perceive me. I need to manage how you look at me, what you think of me. And connection says, I want to be deeply known for who I am, deeply known, not just approved of. In fact, many people will say, research shows that many people one of their biggest regrets is that they were never truly, deeply known for who they were. They were only known for this polished version of themselves. And the other part of performing, the other problem with performing, is that it creates a pseudo version of intimacy. But vulnerability can create real intimacy. And so many of us have been trying to feel deeply connected while never allowing ourselves to be deeply seen. That's the paradox. Every time that we say to ourselves, I shouldn't be feeling this way, I should be over this by now, or I should know better, I've done so much work on myself that I shouldn't show up this way. Every time that I say that to myself, or you say that to yourself, we are moving away from ourselves. Every time that we say to ourselves, this is not a big deal, when it really is a big deal, we move away from ourselves. I can tell you, for example, that I have been feeling grief and sadness recently around empty nesting. Now, my adult children have been moving, they have moved out of the house, they've come back, they've moved out, they've come back. And I know that ultimately they are supposed to leave the nest and fly on their own. That's just the way it goes. And that's the truth. That's the reality. And it is still hard. It is still sad. There's still grief. I have grief over the loss of how it once was. And while it is true that I want to get myself to a place of healing from it, I have to also feel my feelings. And so every time I just say, it's not a big deal, you shouldn't feel this way, this is normal, this is natural. Every parent goes through this. What's going on with you, Kim? Every time that I do that, I move away from myself. Every time that I say yes, when my body says no, I move away from myself, or we move away from ourselves. Every time that you say, yes, I will go out to dinner tonight when you don't want to go out to dinner. Every time that you go out with your friends when you really don't want to go out because you're exhausted and you don't have an ounce more of energy. Every time you say yes to sex when it's a no is moving away from yourself. Every time that you silence yourself to preserve an image, you move away from yourself. Every time that you are about to speak up and assert yourself, but you shut it down quickly and automatically because you can sense that the other person may get upset, or you just don't want to take the risk of a person being upset, you move away from yourself. And when we are disconnected from ourselves, when we abandon ourselves, when we override, and that's what I talked about in last week's episode, override, that's what I'm describing here, is overriding. And so if you haven't had a chance to catch that episode, I invite you to check out last week's episode on override. And so when we do that, when we disconnect from ourselves by overriding, it really does become difficult to feel connected to others. And for so many years, I'm telling you, for decades, I didn't know why I was feeling so disconnected and so lonely until I learned what I learned and I healed. And now that I know what I know, I can do better by showing up for myself now, because I know that if I want to have that intimacy, if I want that connection, I want that belonging, I have to have it with myself first and foremost. And I have to show up as my true self. And I have to take my masks off. But in order to do that, because as I said in the beginning of the episode, what underpins all of this is fear. So in order for me to have more courage to show up as my true self, and this is the same for you, is that it's important that we heal the underlying fear, that we learn how to create safety within. So compassion and loving kindness is one way out. I have learned how to be compassionate with myself. I've learned how to give more space, grace, and gentleness and loving kindness. That's how we break free. Not by continuing to shame ourselves to be perfect. Not by forcing ourselves to now all of a sudden become vulnerable. That will backfire. If you push or force an outcome, force the healing, it's just going to backfire. We must begin with compassion, and we can begin by saying to ourselves, of course, I see how I learned to do this. I see how I was conditioned. I see how I was programmed to do this. And of course, I wanted to be safe. And that's why I do what I do or did what I did. It makes so much sense that I would want to avoid rejection. Who wants to be rejected? Of course, I wanted to be loved. Of course, I wanted approval. Of course, I learned how to hide the parts of myself that were messy or inconvenient or too much for another. But at the end of the day, compassion is what softens, and it's what helps us to break free from the prison walls that have kept us so locked in for so long. And loving kindness helps the inner controller begin to trust that we don't have to perform in order to belong. The inner controller can start to relax and let go of the control, let go of the reins. And as we bring compassion to the parts of ourselves that we have been hiding, we can start to, and that's what this entire podcast is about. This platform is about helping others to unmask, but not all at once. You're not going to just rip them off and it's going to be gone. They're going to be gone. It's not going to happen perfectly. It's going to happen slowly and gently, one mask at a time, and then the mask will come back on, then you take it off, back on, and it'll happen one moment at a time. So I just have a few questions to ask you as I begin to come to a close for this episode, and hoping that these questions might be helpful for you to reflect on. So you can ask yourself, where are you trying to be perfect in your relationships? Where are you trying to be perfect? What are you afraid would happen if you actually told the truth or allowed yourself to be honest and real? What feeling are you avoiding because you don't want to appear as being selfish or too needy, dramatic, or even difficult? Where might you be choosing approval over authenticity? Where are you choosing to keep the peace on the outside, but you're creating loneliness inside of you? And here's maybe the most important question to ask. What would you say if you trusted that you are still worthy of love, even if someone didn't like your truth? What would you say if you trusted that you were still worthy of love, even if that person didn't like your truth? And you don't have to necessarily start with the biggest and hardest conversations. In fact, I would recommend not until you have started small and you practice and you build up to it. At the end of the day, these are just some small openings. These are small acts of freedom, small ways that you can stop performing and start connecting, because that is what we're longing for anyway. And to keep in mind that when I talk about paradise, paradise is not having a relationship where there is never conflict. Paradise is not that you have to be liked by everybody, even though you may secretly want that. And I get it. I get it. Paradise is not always saying the right thing or doing the right thing. It's not about being perfectly and endlessly calm and agreeable and polished and pleasing. That's the prison. Paradise is the freedom to be real. It's the freedom to say, this is what I feel, this is what I think, this is what I believe, this is what I need, this is what is true for me. This is where I end, and this is where you begin. And paradise is being connected to yourself enough that you no longer abandon yourself to be chosen by someone else. This week, I invite you again to notice where perfectionism is creating distance in your relationships. Notice where you're editing, notice where you're performing, notice where you are afraid to be yourself, to be human. And instead of being judgmental, instead of your inner critic going crazy on you, I invite you to bring in compassion. And you might even place your hand on your heart and you could say to yourself, oh my God, this feels scary. I just want to be loved. I want to feel safe. I want to be just accepted for who I am. And I am allowed to be real. I'm allowed to be real. I want to be accepted for my true vulnerable self. And because the connection that you're longing for will not come from becoming more perfect. It will come from being honest, being compassionate, vulnerable, and ultimately your true self. That's how we begin to break free from the prison of perfectionism. And that's how we begin to take off the mask and where true connection, peace, freedom, and joy begin.
As we wrap up today's episode, I just want to say thank you for being here and for taking this time for yourself. If this episode resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast or leave a review. Even a quick star rating helps more people find this space and reminds the algorithms that these conversations matter. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have a question, a takeaway, or something that came up while you were listening, leave a comment or send it in. Let's keep the conversation going. This podcast isn't meant to be a one-way street. It's meant to feel like a community. If you want to learn more about me, my work, or the ways we can go deeper together, you can visit my website. All the details are there. Until next time, take a breath, take the mask off, and be gentle with yourself. I'll see you soon.